You're listening to the REITE Club podcast, where the focus is all about helping you grow your real estate investment portfolio and live the life you want to live. Come grow with us and join our community at thereiteclub.com. And now your hosts, Sarah Larby and Alfonso Salemi.
Can you touch base on the difference to finance a 3-season, what that looks like on average?
Yeah, again, a lot of it comes down to the appraisal. I mean, for the most part, you're looking at some sort of like private or alternate financing, I would say. Banks want to see like year-round access. I mean, otherwise again, it falls into the secondary home. If you're buying a secondary home that's a cottage and you're qualifying to own it, you can go traditional financing on a 3-season cottage. That's no problem. They may want some sort of verification on, the well water or water potability test or something like that, but you can get traditional financing. But the challenge sometimes becomes, well, if this property is a 3-season cottage and you want to make it a long-term rental, how is it going to be rented long-term if it's only 3-season? So depending on, again, the type of deal, that can influence whether or not the bank is going to do it, because the bank will say, well, it can't be a long-term rental. It's a 3-season cottage, so we can't do it. But a secondary home, absolutely, that you could buy a 3-season cottage for a secondary home. We sometimes see people self-finance if they have a large HELOC on their owner-occupied home or on a rental or something. You can acquire these properties for cash sometime. I mean, if there's enough on your HELOC, pay the interest only. That's one of the benefits of having a HELOC. If the plan is to rent it out, you get the interest deduction on that. So lots of different ways to structure it. But again, the intention can sometimes be the driving force when it's a 3-season.
And you mentioned private funds earlier. So is the loan to value the same with private funds? Does it still go up to like potentially 95, or did they keep it lower?
No, well, 95 might be tough on private. I mean, there's people out there that might do it. I don't know whether the numbers would make sense at 95, but you'll see 80% is pretty much the standard. Private lenders are just very much about the resale. That's the private lender, right? All they care about is if what hits the fan, how am I going to get my money back and how quick am I going to sell this house? So location and appraisal is what matters to the lender. So as long as it's in a resellable area. Unique type properties are sometimes more expensive, but your traditional cottage or waterfront, yeah, absolutely. Private lenders will do it. We're seeing pretty good private lender rates right now. I mean, we're seeing 5%, 6% sometimes, depending on location. So, I mean, these are great rates. These are great rates for first mortgage, especially on like Airbnb type properties. They can really be profitable.
What about I know we're really exploring the cottage theme here, but I think it's very pertinent. What about cottages with like no power, no running water? Because I have friends, they have a cottage on a private island or somewhere you only access by boat. Is that easy to finance? Because that sounds
a little bit harder. Good question. A little bit harder. You're starting to get into an area of the resale. I mean, that's the banks and the private lenders are about risk. That's what they lend based on. They based on, it's on risk. And when you start to get out in like, island type, off the grid, how quickly can I resell that house? I need such a unique buyer that as a private lender, I don't want, if something happens, I don't want my money to have to sit in a property like that for 4 to 6 months while we find, the specific buyer that wants to live off the grid. And now I'm not saying they're not out there. I mean, sometimes that life, especially amongst all this real estate, seems quite appealing, right? Off the grid, no cell phone, nothing like that. But the financing can be a little bit tricky. Again, we look at things on something like that, maybe at self-financing, if you have equity in existing properties, before we look at private lending. Private lending is more expensive. And I mean, look, equity in existing rentals is something that if you've done investing in the past 5-10 years, you probably have. So coming back and reaccessing the money through existing rentals, it can really help for that stuff, for sure.
So that leads me, sorry, Sarah, to another question. So equity in other rentals, what's happening with refinancing? Because I'm hearing from some of the people I know it's taking forever for refis because it's not a priority. I mean, you mentioned it earlier. People need quick closing. They need this and that. A refi is definitely secondary. So can you?
Yeah, absolutely. So refi, adding a home equity line of credit. I mean, absolutely. Especially, we live in a little bit of a bubble with real estate. We work, mostly with just investors, and investors right now are in just as quick of a rush as the people that are trying to buy, the people that are, have COFs coming up. people that are closing. Why? Because investors are realizing, and they've been realizing this for a long time, it's no secret, money is cheap right now, right? And if you've bought a property in the last 5 to 10 years, especially, again, I keep mentioning Southern Ontario, that's where we are, but if you bought a property in the last 5 to 10 years in the GTA specifically, it's like winning the lottery. It literally is. You've made 6 figures, potentially multiple times, depending on the property you bought. And what a lot of investors are doing now is they're realizing, look, I'm sitting here with a property I bought for maybe $400,000 or $500,000, you know, in 2015, 2014. This property is now worth $800,000, and I got a mortgage on there of maybe 380 grand. What can I do? Look how well this has worked out for me. I bought this property for $400,000. Now it's worth $700,000-$800,000. This has worked out really well. I haven't really, you know, first-time investors, a lot of the times they worry about, you know, well, what if I can't rent it out? I mean, I'm sure as multiple-time investors, you realize there's no shortage of renters. Like, that's one concern. You don't have to worry. You can be specific. There's lots of renters, so you don't have to worry about that. But these people have gotten in their home. You know, maybe you've learned through learning curve, you know, issues with tenants, but they've basically come now and realized, look, it's 5 years later. I've got all this equity in my house. I'm coming up for mortgage renewal. What do? I want to do this again. I want to buy more properties. And the affordability of money right now on the interest rates. I know the housing market's very high. The cost of housing is expensive, but the money is cheap to acquire it. And I'll give you a quick example. So just so the listeners can get an idea here. So if you're buying and I say 500 because it's easy math for me, but if you're buying a $500,000 house in Southern Ontario, okay, which is going to be hard to find, but let's assume you can find something for $500,000, okay? $100,000 borrowed off of a home equity line of credit right now is going to cost you about $245 of interest-only payments, okay? Why do we pay interest only? Because it's deductible. It's being used towards an investment property. So we pay interest only on $245, okay? It's a tax deduction every year. Then we're acquiring the property. So on this $500,000 property, we've borrowed $100,000 for the down payment. We're now going to borrow $400,000, right? We're going to borrow $400,000 for the remaining mortgage. Now, if we set that up in a variable rate, that $400,000 mortgage is going to cost us about $1,500 a month. So if you look at the overall cost to acquire a $500,000 property right now, you're looking at it's $245, but $250 a month of interest-only payments to borrow the down payment, and then $1,500 to borrow the mortgage payment. So all in for the mortgage and the down payment, you're in $1,750. Okay, plus your property taxes, plus your insurance, so you're maybe all in around $2,000. Most properties, this was a number I might have used a year ago or a year and a half ago, but most properties are cash flowing over that $2,000. If you're renting a $500,000, $600,000 house out, you're probably bringing in $2,200, $2,400. So these investors or people that have equity in their home are realizing, look, I can leverage all of this money to go buy more assets. And that's what you want to do in finance. You want to leverage deductible debt and pay off your non-deductible debt. So they're coming back and they're acquiring these assets that are covering themselves. And every time they've done this over the past 10 years, they've made money because the market continues to go up and the equity continues to appreciate. So a lot of people, and again, you know, I'm just a lowly mortgage broker in Southern Ontario, but people ask me all the time, what's driving the market? The cost of money, number one. I wouldn't say that's number one, but that's one of the reasons, the cost of money. You know, supply and demand, obviously, there's a shortage of that. You know, people don't realize we're still processing the immigration applications, right? No, the borders are closed. Nobody's coming over, but these people, the majority of immigration that's coming over, and if you look at the amount of numbers that are coming, the bulk of them are coming to Southern Ontario. I mean, it's supply and demand. You can say anything you want about economics, but you can't take away supply and demand. So when you compare cheap money to, you know, supply and demand, and you have people that the only way now these people are really able to acquire properties. I mean, look, it's very tough for first-time buyers now to buy properties. I mean, that's something that's getting lost in this whole shuffle, right? We're changing these mortgage rules. You know, we're trying to slow the market, but it's really only affecting the 5 to 10% down, which is tough because those are the people that you know are trying to acquire property. That's the next generation. That's the youth. But they need that kickstart. These people, these investors that have all this equity in their properties, they're steps, they're miles ahead now. They've got hundreds of thousands of dollars. They're putting 20% down on multiple properties. They have that ability. So it's really creating, you know, a gap between the people who own the assets and the people that don't. But the money is cheap. It's $2,000 and you could be all in for a $500,000 house that's appreciating at, you know, I dare to say 5 to 10%. I used to be scared to say 5%. I'd tell people 2 to 3%, expect, 5% is a great return. 5% now, people would balk at that. 5%, that's not enough. That's crazy. Markets down here is nuts. So.
Thanks for listening to the REITE Club podcast and joining our community of real estate investors online at thereiteclub.com, where the focus is about helping you grow. We look forward to seeing you again next week. Thanks from your hosts, Sarah Larby and Alfonso Salemi.